Chapter 272, Side Story, Interlude 3. She opened her eyes. Despite having slept for only a brief period, she couldn't shake off the drowsiness. She lay still for a few moments, hoping to drift back into slumber, but her efforts were in vain. Once awake, she found it hard to return to the land of dreams. In the end, Sienna let out a deep sigh of frustration as she opened her eyes. Anise had cast divine magic to stabilize her mind before she had fallen asleep, and Sienna had even resorted to a sleeping spell. But in this place so close to the gates of hell, such methods seemed futile. The castle of the Demon King of Incarceration exuded a palpable aura of dark power that surrounded them. Morgiabella and her army of night demons relentlessly attacked the heroes in their dreams, attempting to penetrate their minds. Despite their failed attempts, each attack eroded the divine power and dispersed the magic that protected the heroes and polluted their minds. Sienna had always believed that wizards had a predisposition towards being sensitive psychopaths, even if others denied it. The recent events had given her a lot to worry about, and the constant stress had taken a toll on her. So it was no surprise that she suffered from insomnia and found it difficult to get a good night's sleep. "Are you having trouble falling asleep?" asked Vermouth. "Yeah," Sienna answered while rubbing her eyes. She turned her head and found Vermouth sitting in front of the bonfire. His golden eyes were calm before the swaying flames, and Sienna waved her fingers while receiving his gaze. "You should sleep even if you have to force it," said Vermouth. With a saint and an arch-wizard among their ranks, the party didn't urgently require rest. Even if they managed to get only the bare minimum of sleep, they could rely on their reserves of magic and divine power to supplement their energy. "I'll manage for now." "No need to worry," Sienna replied with a grin. Just because they weren't in desperate need of rest didn't mean it was unnecessary. Using magic and divine power to counteract mental and physical fatigue was only a temporary solution. Prolonged sleep deprivation could have long-term consequences, including a reduced life expectancy. "Are you pushing yourself too hard?" Vermouth asked with a note of concern in his voice. Sienna didn't respond immediately, instead fixing her gaze on Vermouth's face beyond the flickering flames of the bonfire. The light from the fire illuminated Vermouth's pale skin and gray hair, casting an orange hue upon him. Only his eyes remained a striking shade of gold. Even after traveling together for 16 years, Sienna still felt a sense of unease when she met his gaze. "Who among us isn't pushing ourselves?" "Vermouth, you're overdoing it too, don't you think so?" said Sienna with a nonchalant smile. Vermouth Lionheart had remained unchanged since the day they had first met. Sienna, Anise, Molin and Hamel had all undergone some transformation during their journey, but Vermouth seemed to have remained the same. At least that was what Sienna thought. Right from the start, Vermouth had been perfect and transcendent. Sienna couldn't deny that he had grown even more perfect and transcendent over time, but that didn't mean he wasn't perfect to begin with. Then and now he was mysterious and heroic. It was as if he was a human, or rather an existence who was born this way. "I'm fine, so there's no need to worry about me," answered Vermouth. Sienna couldn't fathom what was going on inside the mind of the great hero, and she knew the others would agree. Vermouth Lionheart never revealed his true feelings and thoughts. Nevertheless, none of them had ever doubted Vermouth's true intentions. Similar to everyone else, Vermouth was completely sincere about killing the Demon Kings and saving the world. Vermouth was a perfect and transcendent being, a mysterious and enigmatic warrior, which was why the world called him the hero. Even after spending 16 years with him, Sienna and the others still saw Vermouth as the hero. Vermouth became the core and support for everyone in the group, and even Hamel, who often grumbled, acknowledged this fact. Without Vermouth, they would never have made it this far. They would have failed to defeat even the first Demon King, the Demon King of Carnage, let alone 3 of them. It's far. Even though only a bonfire separated the two of them, Sienna couldn't help but feel a great distance from Vermouth. They fought, talked, ate and drank together, and in the small moments of their daily lives she felt close to Vermouth. He was a warrior and the hero, but also her comrade and friend. However, at moments like these, when Vermouth stared at her with such serene eyes, Vermouth felt so far away. Perhaps it was only possible she had absolute trust in his words because of how distant he felt sometimes. Sienna shook her head, trying to dispel the throbbing pain in her head. She glanced around at her companions, finding Molin sprawled out on the ground and Anise curled up in a ball, sound asleep. She could not see Hamel. Is it for us? Or is it for Hamel? Asked Sienna, unknowingly giving a wry smile. Vermouth did not answer immediately but instead gave a shrug. I don't know what you are talking about. Vermouth, I think you're particularly soft when it comes to Hamel. You've always been, said Sienna. It's unfair of you to make it sound like I'm the only one. Aren't we all particularly soft when it comes to Hamel? Responded Vermouth with an awkward smile. They were in the depths of hell, a place where they had to always remain on guard. Even the smallest of sounds had to be taken seriously and sensitively. Even though Sienna and Vermouth were talking in hushed tones, despite their conversation, Anise and Molin weren't being disturbed from their sleep. Moreover, Sienna could not hear any sound coming from beyond the darkness. It was all thanks to Vermouth's magic. I know I've already said it a dozen times, but I'm going to say it again. Vermouth, when we finally leave this forsaken place and return to the continent. You want to study my magic, don't you? Although to be honest, I'm not a fan of the idea, responded Vermouth. Why not? The world will be at peace by then, and it's not like I will do anything bad by researching your magic. It's all for the sake of developing magic, Sienna said. Isn't your curiosity a bigger factor? Asked Vermouth. Satisfying my curiosity and getting answers is equivalent to the development of magic. It was an arrogant thing to say, but Sienna meant it from the bottom of her heart. She raised herself up with a smile without any sign of embarrassment. There's some time left until I take the watch, right? I'll go see Hamel just in case. Sienna, if you'd like, we don't have to switch, said Vermouth. What are you talking about? Asked Sienna. I'm saying you should have a bit more courage, Vermouth responded with a faint smile. Sienna simply blinked with confusion, not immediately understanding his words. She was the next person on duty, but they didn't need to switch? Was Vermouth suggesting that he would take 2 shifts in a row? Why, courage. The moment she came to understand, Sienna became wide-eyed and her jaw dropped. Although the throbbing headache was gone, she felt her cheeks flushing with heat. WW, what are you saying? Sienna hissed fiercely. Did I say something weird? Vermouth said with a nonchalant expression while tilting his head. Sienna waved her arms for no reason before slapping herself on her cheeks. Why are you saying something so weird, out of the blue? What do you mean by courage? Your reaction seems even more strange to me. Can you still be so embarrassed after having feelings for 16 years? Asked Vermouth. It's not 16 years. That can't be true. Vermouth didn't have a teasing expression. He looked as calm as ever, which drove Sienna even more crazy. She tore at her sinless hair, groped her memories and counted the years. Strictly speaking, about 15.5 years. If you're still so embarrassed about it, it'll be hard for you to take courage. Do you need help? Asked Vermouth. Don't do something so useless. I'll take care of it myself. And you know, it's not like we can afford to worry about those things right now, right? Said Sienna, desperately trying to maintain a calm expression. But it wasn't just an excuse. Regardless of how long she had been harboring her feelings or how great they were, their current priority was to kill the Demon Kings to save the world. It was only right to put aside her feelings until later. Someday then, Vermouth said with a faint smile. He stared at Sienna while continuing. On a day when everything will be finished, a day where we can enjoy the future we often laughed and talked about. They frequently discussed their aspirations for the future. Molin yearned to become a king, while Anise dreamt of a tranquil and freeing journey. Although Hamel was usually reluctant to speak, he had occasionally brought up the idea of teaching swordsmanship to war orphans. Sienna had her own aspirations for the future. She longed for a simple life, to get married, have children and grow old and become a grandmother. While she acknowledged that this kind of life wasn't the only way to live an ordinary life, it was what she desired. During their conversations about their future plans, Vermouth would occasionally grace them with a rare smile. It wasn't an unfamiliar smile. You don't know how a human heart might change, Vermouth. Even if I... Right now, Hamel. Right. Even though that's how it is, you don't know how it might change in the future, right? When we return to the continent. Unfortunately, Sienna could not continue her words. She could not possibly imagine herself loving any man other than Hamel. Even if it were just words, she didn't want to say something she didn't believe in. It felt as if she would be committing a crime by voicing it. In the end, she pouted without continuing her words. Vermouth gave a smile and chuckled at her reaction. I don't want to become the subject of your magic research, but I would not mind. Right, I wouldn't mind officiating at Hamel and your wedding. If I can, that is, said Vermouth. Don't say such crazy things. Wedding. As I said, you never know how things will turn out. I'm going, Vermouth. I can't bear listening to this nonsense. This isn't like you, stuttered Sienna before jerking around. It felt as if her face would explode from all the heat. Sienna was taken aback by Vermouth's unexpected remark. Her emotions fluctuated even more, knowing that Vermouth wasn't one to normally joke around. But contrary to her emotions, delusions were freely developing in her head. She had already imagined something like this several times, a shameful fantasy she could never tell anyone about. You shameful bitch, Sienna chided herself. But in fact, there was one existence who already knew about her shameful delusions. Her delusions had only taken shape in detail when she was attacked by Noir Giabella. She had dreamed because of the damned wench. Sienna didn't want a simple wedding. After all, it was a once-in-lifetime event. If she were to have a wedding, she wanted a big wedding that would go down in history, a wedding that everyone on the continent would know about. It was only befitting that the wedding of two heroes, those who saved the world, would be grand. They would hold the wedding at the largest and most splendid castle on the continent. Regardless of who it belonged to, whether it was a king or an emperor, they would gladly empty the castle at Sienna's request. The event would be grander and more glamorous than any coronation, but also magnificent and beautiful. All the kings of the continent would be required to attend the wedding as guests. What if they didn't? Then they would be subject to the petty anger of the arch-wizard, the defeater of the demon kings. Any highly regarded noble would also need to attend and offer the riches they accumulated while the heroes saved the world. If Vermouth would officiate, could Molen host it? No, it would be too heavy a burden for the idiot. Anise. No. That would be too cruel. She could just leave it to any king. She wanted Anice's blessing, but now she knew she couldn't ask for it. What if they held a joint wedding? She was sure it would surprise everyone, but who cared? They had saved the world. They could do anything they wanted. Hamel must have saved the world in his previous life. No, perhaps he could enjoy the luxury because he would save the world in this life. It was quite a delightful sight to imagine. You would look extremely awkward in your tuxedo, and Anise and I will be in pure white dresses at your sides. When Vermouth calls us, the three of us will enter together. That idiot Molen will burst into tears when he sees us walk in. This was even better. Both of them would be holding a bouquet, and in the end they could throw one to Vermouth and Molen each. I don't think either of them would be married by then. For some reason, I think Vermouth will be single for the rest of his life, and Molen, well. On second thought, she could imagine Molen getting married very quickly. Then would I be worse than Molen? I guess I can't help it. If I lose to Molen, I'll be teased for the rest of my life. I should try harder and get married faster than Molen. Was it possible that she was currently under attack from Noir Giabella? Unless the whorish queen was attacking her mind, how could she be entertaining such shameful thoughts? Otherwise, there was no way she would be sinking so deep into these crazy imaginations, was there? But that was impossible. She knew that she couldn't be dreaming when she saw Hamel in the distance. She knew that the delusions floating in her mind and the emotions causing her heart to race couldn't be caused by Noir's hypnosis. They were sincere. It wasn't difficult to admit to her own feelings. As Vermouth had said, she had been harboring these feelings for 16, or rather 15.5 years. She had cleared up the confusion and acknowledged her own feelings about 10 years ago, or 9 years and a few months to be exact. However, she was still embarrassed and her heart still fluttered, just because that's who Sienna was as a person. She had accepted her feelings long ago, but she still couldn't express them directly. Indeed, she would need to properly confirm her feelings with Hamel, but before it ever came to that, she hoped that the stupid, idiotic moron would notice it first. Rather than having to convey her feelings with a red face, she hoped Hamel would be the first to confess with a bouquet, or even a single wildflower. Sienna had been inducing Hamel to fall in love with her until now. The problem was that he was an incredibly dense, stupid, idiotic moron, so she switched things up. Every once in a while, when it was inevitable and necessary, Sienna revealed a tiny portion of her feelings to Hamel, just enough that no one but Hamel would notice. It was perfect for Sienna to look back on. Vermouth and Anise had noticed, but that was only because both of them were more quick-witted than necessary. Unfortunately, Hamel, on the other hand, seemed to be even denser than Mullen when it came to these things. "Why are you sitting there like that?" Sienna cleared her face before speaking to Hamel. Was her face still red? But wouldn't it be better flushed to appeal to the idiot? No, she didn't like it. She didn't want to show her flushed face to him even if it might appeal to him. It was embarrassing and she wanted to maintain her composure. "And why aren't you sleeping?" Hamel said after raising his head and looking back at Sienna. He was sitting on the ground. Sienna smirked without meaning to. This is just how it was. Her emotions had aged for 15 years, but she was still embarrassed, and her heart fluttered when she saw Hamel. "I'm on watch after Vermouth, stupid," said Sienna. "There's more than an hour left," responded Hamel. "It's only polite to wake up earlier and get ready," said Sienna. "At least put a little effort into your lie. It's obvious. You can't fall asleep, can you?" Hamel said with a smile while wiping the sweat off his forehead. Instead of answering, Sienna snorted. As Hamel said, it was quite obvious and quite a common occurrence. Sleep even if you have to force it. It's been a while since you slept properly, right? You're going to hurt yourself. Would you mind not worrying about me? Speak for yourself. "Who's worried about who?" retorted Sienna while clearing her face. She was sincere and meant every word. But instead of answering, Hamel shrugged. His scarred upper body was soaked with sweat, and sprawled around him were the many weapons he liked to use. This was also an obvious, everyday occurrence. Hamel did not allow his body to rest even at dawn when everyone else was asleep. He trained himself and wielded his weapons like an obsession. "It's not like this is the first time you've seen me," said Hamel. "Did you already forget what we talked about earlier? Your body is a wreck, so take a break," responded Sienna. "I become dull if I rest. I need to keep adjusting it so it'll move well when needed," responded Hamel. "Don't say something so stupid. Do you want to get beaten up by Anise again? Or I can just beat you up right now myself," said Sienna. "I didn't overdo it." Hamel raised himself, dusted his hands, then picked up the towel at his feet. "I'm just figuring out how far I can push myself and how much I can move." "It's really serious if you have to figure that out," answered Sienna. "Who in the world would want to die?" said Hamel with a laugh while wiping himself down with rough movements. "All I'm doing is to make sure I don't die. Just... Yeah, no, I'm not going back and I'm not going to wait by myself either. I'm going to come with you guys no matter what. If you're really that worried about me, protect me so that I don't die." Hamel shot back before Sienna could speak. Sienna opened her mouth a few times, then frowned before hitting Hamel's chest. "Bastard." She made sure to use quite a bit of force, seeing how annoying he was. However, Hamel appeared unfazed and gave a smile in response. "No matter how much I think about it, it's weird how soft Vermouth is when it comes to you." "Why did he let an injured moron train?" said Sienna. "Because he knows me well," responded Hamel. "Same as before. If Vermouth pushed you then..." "It's the same as you," commented Hamel. He kicked a large sword off the ground, then snatched it out of the air before placing it over his shoulder. "Sienna, in the end you couldn't push me either. It's the same with Vermouth. He knows I'm not going to listen regardless of whether he pushes me or not. If so, it's better for him to keep an eye on me, right? You have a talent for sugarcoating your words. You're basically saying that you're a stubborn moron who runs wild without any regard for your life," said Sienna. "See? You know me well, Sienna," said Hamel. "Every time you act like that I feel like an idiot for worrying about you," said Sienna. "Then don't worry about me." Hamel grinned, then pushed his thumb against his chest. "I won't die." It was a funny thing to say. Anyone in the world could say that they wouldn't die, and there were countless people who would die after spouting such words. Could Hamel be an unconditional exception? Sienna just couldn't bring herself to believe it, but she had no choice. There were no other acceptable outcomes. Everyone, including Sienna, had survived until now by dedicating themselves to keeping each other from dying. "Moron," Sienna murmured in a small voice before giving a deep sigh. "I'm going to be careful on my own and I won't overdo it. So Hamel, you have to do the same. Be careful, don't push yourself, and if you don't want to kill me you have to protect me. Because I'll protect you too. It's not just us two. Everyone's the same, aren't they? I think if any of us ends up dying, wouldn't it end up being Mullen? That bastard's always rushing in without thinking." Hamel's words were insincere and he laughed playfully. He had already come to a conclusion to his question a long time ago. If any one of them had to die, then... As long as you survive, there's always a next time, Hamel, Sienna said before smiling for him to see. It felt as if he had been caught red-handed. After blinking a few times, Hamel swung his sword with a smile. I don't want to have this conversation. Sienna sat down while thinking so. This was a familiar situation. Whenever Hamel trained himself with his weapons, Sienna could usually be found seated somewhere nearby. At times like these, there wasn't a big need for conversation, and today was the same. Sienna watched Hamel wield his sword without saying a word. Childish brat. But she had to say what she had to say. What? Asked Hamel. You're doing that on purpose for me to see. You're only using your bare body without any mana. Are you protesting to me that your body is fine? Is that it? Continued Sienna. No, I'm just training my body. This is what's wrong with wizards. They're obsessed with mana. Mana this, mana that. It's not a good thing to train only mana, you know? You need to train your body as well if you want to, explained Hamel. I get it, so take it easy. Everyone knows you train at night, but if you really do get hurt, a niece won't leave you in one piece when she wakes up, said Sienna. Hamel's expression stiffened at her words as if he were genuinely concerned about being the recipient of a niece's violence. Sienna giggled as Hamel sneakily released his mana. What did you talk about with vermouth? Asked Hamel while clearing his throat as if he were embarrassed by Sienna's giggle. What else would we talk about? Bad-mouthing you, responded Sienna. You already do that every day, responded Hamel. Right, well. We just talked about the usual, said Sienna. Ah, I see. Talking about what we would be doing later, asked Hamel. Sienna smiled. Maybe they did know each other too well. Yeah. But now, we can start to take it more seriously. There are only 2 demon kings left. But it'll be harder to kill the remaining 2 than the 3 we got already, said Hamel. You've been so stubborn until now, so why are you acting so weak? Hamel, are you really planning to teach orphans how to use the sword? You want to build an orphanage after yourself or something? Asked Sienna. I've been thinking about it, but what if I build an academy instead of an orphanage? I'll gather orphans from all over the country and teach them this and that, answered Hamel. Ah yes. You'll name it after yourself and call it the Hamel Academy, won't you? If you build an academy, there will be lines of people who will want to join, not just orphans, said Sienna. You don't think they would kill their parents just to? Don't be an idiot. Sienna cut off his words while straightening her face. I think an academy will be nice. Apart from his nonsensical comment, Sienna empathized with his plan. Regardless of what he wanted, it was nice to plan the future after saving the world from its terrible fate. I'm going to continue my magic research, so... Right. Hamel, if you build an academy, I'll grace you with my presence as the professor of magic, said Sienna. But Arath already has the magic academy. They have the towers too, commented Hamel. Ha. The wizards of Arath are old men who want to be served on a silver platter even though they're inferior to me. I guarantee that I'll be better than all the heads of the magic towers and the professors combined when it comes to developing magic and passing it on to future generations, said Sienna confidently. The future was a topic of discussion for them, but it was never a fixed notion. Every time they talked about it, the vision they had would shift and transform, sometimes only slightly and sometimes drastically. This was because their dreams and aspirations evolved over time. That's why I'll help you. Such a future. I think it's pretty good, muttered Sienna with a faint smile. As if embarrassed, Hamel turned his head completely while swinging his sword. I can't imagine you being the headmaster of an academy, commented Sienna. On second thought, I don't think I'll build it. I'll just go somewhere airy and peaceful and farm, responded Hamel. Embarrassed, are you? Sienna giggled while hugging her knees. Their visions changed every time they talked, but some things remained the same. Sienna hoped for a happy life, and since some time ago, Hamel was always by her side in the future she drew. That was how it had to be. Chapter 273, Side Story, Interlude 3. The formidable fortress of the Demon King of Incarceration was nestled within the giant Centipede Mountains, whose twisting peaks resembled the slithering body of a monstrous insect. Moreover, the mountains actually wriggled like living creatures. Like a watchful sentinel, the mountain range served as a natural barrier, guarding the Demon King's stronghold and imprisoning anyone who dared to cross its treacherous terrain. Not only did the high walls that encircled the castle protect the Demon King, but they also ensured that any intruders who braved the mountain's deadly embrace would meet with a swift and merciless death. As soon as one crossed the immense and dreadful giant centipede mountains, the sky above would appear different, transformed by the overwhelming presence of the Demon King of Incarceration. His formidable power gradually spread through the world around him, painting it in his own colors and announcing his terrifying strength to any who approached. Beyond the giant centipede mountains, there existed no discernible day or night. The blazing sun could not penetrate the veil of darkness that enveloped the sky above the Demon King of Incarceration, and even the blackest of nights could not rival the oppressive shadows cast by the Demon King's dark power. Neither bright nor dark existed under the gray sky. There was just red earth, the red plains, and the only other thing that could be found was a dull black mist. The Black Fog was a nightly order of demon folks headed by Gavid Lindman, the Blade of Incarceration and the henchman of the Demon King of Incarceration. In order to reach the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration, one needed to cross the Red Plains, the garrison of the Black Fog. The might of the Black Fog was unmatched. Its knights numbered 300, and they had earned the moniker of the Nightmare of Helmuth. Countless armies and orders that had dared to challenge the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration had met their end at the hands of the fearsome Black Fog, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. Despite the seemingly endless stream of despairing reports, there were those who refused to give up hope. While some were driven to flee in fear, others remained steadfast, convinced that their sacrifice would inspire others to take up arms and continue the fight, even if it meant they themselves would fall on the battlefield with swords embedded in their bodies. These brave souls chose to turn back from their fleeing steps and lay down their lives for the sake of a glimmer of hope. Ah! Among the sea of lifeless bodies, one face stood out. The face of a knight that the group had encountered before crossing the mountains. He was one of the 3 broken knights they had chanced upon, the very same one who had tearfully implored them to defeat the Demon King and offered them the tasteless alcohol. The upper body of the knight lay amid the corpses, separated from the rest of his body. However, the expression on his face was not one of anguish or resentment. It seemed as though his life had been cut short before he even had the chance to react. Nevertheless, Sienna couldn't bear to entertain the thought of such a bleak and dreadful end. She wondered why this knight had met his end here after having expressed his desire to leave the Devildom and return to his hometown. Where were the other 2 knights whom the group had encountered with him? Had they changed their minds, or had this knight acted alone in his decision to confront the Demon King? There was a crude symbol engraved on the crumpled chest plate of the knight, a coat of arms depicting a lion. It was a symbol that had come to represent Vermouth Lionheart at some point. Ah! Loud shouts filled Sienna's surroundings. There were now more than 1,000 knights and soldiers marching on the Red Plains, and the symbol of the lion was engraved on the chests of all those charging forward. Upon hearing that Vermouth, the hero, was leading a group to the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration, the warriors had rallied to their cause. Despite their armor being rusty and dented, they had adorned it with the emblem of a lion and joined forces with Vermouth and his comrades to cross the treacherous Centipede Mountains. Now they were charging headlong toward the Black Fog which stood in their way on the Red Plains. The vanguard rushed to their deaths. The Black Fog was as strong as or even stronger than the rumors had claimed. The human knights weren't even properly armed, and they could do little more than serve as meat shields, absorbing a blow from the demons before falling to their deaths. However, the Black Fog was not the only obstacle the warriors faced. Countless demonic beasts emerged from the castle and chased after the Black Fog, adding to the forces of the already overwhelming opposition. Nevertheless, despite the inevitable and irreparable losses they suffered, the deaths of their fellow warriors only fueled the survivors' determination and spirit. They became even more frenzied and resolved to fight on. The knights and soldiers were undeterred because they knew their sacrifices would not be in vain. The hero Vermouth Lionheart was among them, leading the charge and rallying their spirits as he raised the brilliant holy sword high above his head. Moreover, it was not just Vermouth whom they followed. In fact, all 4 of his companions were by his side, fighting alongside the knights and soldiers as they pressed forward. Molan charged forth, his body impervious to the sharp blades of the Black Fog. His howls echoed across the battlefield as he swung his axe and hammer, crushing the bodies of demon folks and dispersing the fog. His determination to protect his comrades fueled his actions even as those around him fell. Hamel followed right behind. Just as he had done in all the battles prior, Hamel stood by Vermouth and kept pace. Even in the midst of the chaotic battle, both Hamel and Vermouth participated in the unrestrained one-sided slaughter. He didn't use ignition. What a relief, Sienna thought. She found momentary relief in the fact that with so many people fighting by their sides, the burden placed on Hamel was greatly reduced. This was one of the wishes of those knights accompanying the heroes. They had come to lay down their lives for the hero Vermouth and his companions to ensure they would not suffer much damage on their way to knocking down the demon king of incarceration. The warriors would help the hero and his group be in the best condition possible, even if doing so would ultimately cost the knights and soldiers their lives. Above them, a brilliant ray of light shone in the sky, despite the absence of the sun. Sienna looked up and saw Anise praying while surrounded by injured priests. Their divine power was channeled to Anise, who unleashed miraculous abilities impossible for others to replicate. The pouring light quickly healed the injuries of the group's allies and transformed the fear glistening in their eyes, which reflected the blades of their enemies into courage. The light energized the tired bodies and pushed back the black fog along with the holy sword while offsetting the dark power of the demon folks. In addition, the demon folks whose dark power was dispersed were purified just by becoming exposed to the light. Lady Sienna. It's ready, a shout came from behind Sienna. Sienna glanced back and nodded while clutching Akasha with both her hands. After rising high off the ground, Sienna looked down. She saw, at best, dozens of survivors from Aratha's magic corps as well as the war wizards of various nations. But Sienna could not consider any of them as true archwizards. Nevertheless, it didn't matter. She had already weaved the spell beforehand and was taking care of everything, from the development of the spell to coordination. What did it matter even if there were only dozens of wizards and if none of them were archwizards? Sienna alone was an archwizard greater than hundreds of wizards combined. The recitation began, and each time her lips moved, huge amounts of mana formed rings in Sienna's body. Soon 9 rings had formed in total and they overlapped into one large ring. Ah! The wizards on the ground looked up at Sienna with reverential gazes. They did not know exactly how Sienna formed her spells, but they knew that none of them could ever hope to reach the transcendental state she was in. The wizards did not know when the war with the demon folks would come to an end, but one thing was clear regarding Sienna. Her name would be engraved as the biggest and clearest presence in the history of magic, and the name Sienna Meridian would serve as the turning point for wizards as a whole. Even if the demon folks ended up winning the war and all other existences were wiped out, the demon folks would not be able to leave out the name Sienna Meridian when they referred back to the study of magic in the future. If the continent were to win the war, then the future wizards of the continent, or rather all wizards in the future, would aim to become like Sienna Meridian. The magic was completed and the rain of death began to fall. Hundreds of small bullets poured down like a meteor shower. The bullets weren't simple though. Each droplet of death was carefully constructed with high concentrations of mana, condensed to its limit. The projectiles of mana would penetrate the dark power protecting the demons as well as their armor, before taking root inside their hearts and exploding. Although the battlefield was a complete mess, Sienna's onslaught of magic moved accurately and only struck the demon knights. The weaker demons of the Black Fog were slaughtered by dozens after being struck by the magical bullets, and the blood of over 100 demonic beasts soaked the plains as they were ground into unrecognizable shapes. Sienna of Disaster. Gavid's expression became distorted as he commanded the Black Fog. His eyes glowed a crimson red, and the series of magical bullets exploded and disappeared. Nonetheless, Sienna wasn't finished yet. She accelerated her recitations as her bloodshot eyes glimmered. Asha responded to her by emitting a brilliant light, and the wizards on the ground desperately kept pace in spite of the blood flowing freely from all of their facial orifices. The sky started to distort, and an artificially formed sphere of overwhelming mass and weight began its descent to the ground, crushing the cloudy sky beneath it. It was a meteor. This wasn't a meteorite drawn from outer space, but a mass of gigantic proportions, sufficient to wipe a country or even an entire civilization off the map. Quote. As the meteor started its descent, Gavid Lindman and the Black Fog looked up at the sky in horror. Even though Sienna of Disaster and Anise of Hell were here, It would be impossible for anyone to survive if a meteor of such a size crashed to the ground. Everyone, both the allies and the enemies, would be wiped out. "Your Majesty," shouted Gavid. However, the giant projectile wasn't aimed at the Red Plane but at the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. If it were an attack formed by mana, there was always a high possibility that the Demon King of Incarceration would easily block it. Demon Kings had such power, the power to destroy human magic with a snort. That's why Sienna had insisted on launching a physical bombardment using a meteor. The gigantic mass, which had been created a few days prior, was large enough to crush the entirety of the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. Blood flowed freely from the lips of those reciting the incantations. They were guiding the meteor while adding dozens of attack magic to the surface of the meteor. Die. Sienna truly wished that the meteor would crush the terrible castle and that the Demon King of Incarceration would be buried alive without ever having the chance to put up any resistance. Woo. Darkness spewed from the towering fortress of the Demon King of Incarceration. The darkness seemed to form into a veil surrounding the castle, then it gathered into a single point at the top of one of the spires. The darkness wove into a chain before wrapping around the falling meteor. There was no sound. There was no explosion, no roar, nothing. Just like that, the huge meteor disappeared. Sienna stumbled in the air, unable to believe what had just happened. The Demon King of Incarceration. Sienna glared at the castle. She could see a man standing at the top of the castle's spire, where the chain had originated from. The Demon King of Incarceration was unlike any of the Demon Kings she had encountered until now. Although the horns on his head betrayed his identity, he looked very human. His appearance was strangely calm and small compared to the Demon King of Destruction, who took on no tangible form, or the other Demon Kings, who had been rather fierce and large in appearance. As if having sensed Sienna's gaze, the Demon King of Incarceration turned his gaze with a slight tilt of his head toward where Sienna stood in the sky. Zing. Simply meeting the Demon King of Incarceration's gaze made Sienna feel as if her mind would collapse. A sharp headache threatened to knock her unconscious, and her body went crashing down. "Hey, are you okay?" Fush. The wind brought forth a familiar smell. Sienna opened her eyes and turned her head to find Hamel, who had leaped to catch her from afar before her. She gasped when she realized she was in Hamel's arms. "You smell like blood," commented Sienna. "Of course I do," responded Hamel with a nonchalant gaze while licking a stream of blood running down his cheek. He was covered with the blood of the demon folks he had slaughtered as well as the blood flowing from his own wounds. Sienna felt the blood soaking her robe as she tightened her grasp on Hamel's clothes. "You didn't use ignition, did you?" asked Sienna. "I didn't," responded Hamel. "You're lying," said Sienna. "It was only for a brief moment, so I basically didn't." "There's barely any recoil," grumbled Hamel, flicking her forehead with his finger. "Why don't you worry about yourself instead of me, huh? I told you yesterday, didn't I? Don't aim for the castle." The Demon King of Incarceration isn't an idiot, so how could he fail to deal with a magic attack right on top of his castle? "But it was worth trying," said Sienna. Right. Thanks to you, we were able to discover that your magic doesn't have much of an impact on the Demon King of Incarceration," said Hamel. Sienna released Hamel's collar while muttering in a small voice, "I can just use other types of magic." "But..." Hamel placed Sienna on the ground before shaking his head. "Don't use anything big and just maintain your condition." "I'm going." "Are you going to Vermouth?" asked Sienna hesitantly. "Who else would I go to besides that bastard? I came here because I was surprised to see you fall, but Vermouth isn't having it easy either. I'd like to take the head of that bastard Gavid today." Hamel turned his head while clicking his tongue. Boom. An explosion resounded from the far side of the battlefield, and a murky moonlight soared into the sky. Vermouth had resorted to using the moonlight sword. "But that seems to be out of the question," concluded Hamel. Immediately afterward, he saw Gavid jump into the sky to escape the consecutive bursts of moonlight. His eyes glowed black, and dark power rose like a flame from the sword that he held with one hand. In combination with the power of the demon eye of divine glory, the demonic sword glory was preventing the moonlight from destroying everything in its path. "This isn't just a brief moment," muttered Sienna while pressing down on her throbbing chest with her hand. Hamel crossed the battlefield and joined Vermouth. He had no choice but to use ignition to keep pace with Vermouth, who had taken out the moonlight sword. "Liar," Sienna spade accusingly. Hamel had promised not to use ignition in this battle, but Sienna had not expected him to keep his promise. In order to enter the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration, it was necessary to conquer the Red Plains and exterminate the Black Fog, and that was why everyone was so desperate. Despite being inferior in number, the scales of the battle were tipping in their favor because Sienna, Anise, Molen, Vermouth and Hamel were dominating the battlefield. In spite of this, there were simply too many enemies. Each ally had to kill dozens of demonfolks and demonic beasts to completely eliminate the enemy forces. However, the knights and soldiers participating in the battlefield were incomparably weaker than Sienna and her comrades. Even so, they stabbed their enemies without hesitation despite losing their limbs. There were even people who triggered the mana in their body to explode along with their enemies. Everyone was desperate because they knew the significance of today's battle, and that's why Sienna could not complain about Hamel's lies. She took out a potion from the subspace inside her robe and gulped it down. Afterwards, Sienna repeated the same actions from her 16 years of battles. She chugged down potions like water to keep her mana stores up while unleashing bombardments of magic. She supported herself with Anise's light and took the path that Molen had carved. Meanwhile, Sienna continued to observe Hamel and Vermouth as they pushed the enemy's commander. Whenever she saw there was a chance, she threatened Gavid with her magic. They fought for a long time. Even though day and night weren't distinguished here, it felt as if they had battled for an entire day. The seemingly endless shouts slowly faded and silence surfaced from time to time. The plains were colored red with blood, rather befitting of its name, and the stench of the corpses and blood was pungent. Sienna recited incantations with lifeless eyes. Her lips were extremely dry and torn, causing blood to drip from her lips, but she still recited incantations while stumbling forward. Sienna, Sienna. Arms clutched around Sienna's waist from behind and she came to a stop. Sienna jumped up and looked back. She saw a pale and lifeless face. Anise was taking ragged breaths. She too reeked of blood. "It's over," Anise stated. "Anise," Sienna uttered. "It's over. Stupid Sienna. Even though you always berate Molen and Hamel, you're no different from them. Have you been consumed by your magic again?" asked Anise. It had been inevitable. In order to accurately distinguish between friend and foe while continuously casting spells, she needed to completely merge her consciousness with magic. However, doing so transformed her into a mobilized magic cannon optimized for battles. "I wasn't consumed. Sienna tried to refute. "Yes, I know very well what you were trying to say. Anyways, it's over," said Anise while enduring her pain. She clicked her tongue as she looked over Sienna's torn lips, ragged hands and dragging feet. "At least you're better off than Molen. That's a relief." "How is Molen?" asked Sienna. "Well, I don't know where to start. Both of his arms were severed about 4 times and he lost his entire lower body once. That's not including the injuries to his legs," explained Anise. "Our damages. In short, about 200 people survived. Less than 100 if we're excluding those who survived through the skin of their teeth. But yes, what's important is that they are still alive," continued Anise. "What about Hamel and Vermouth?" asked Sienna. "They're fine," answered Anise. She let out a long sigh before stretching her hand toward Sienna. Fwoosh. The light coming from Anise's hand was dim compared to the beginning of the battle, but the miracle quickly healed Sienna's injuries. But they missed the blade of incarceration. We couldn't catch him once he made up his mind to run. Morgiabella's demon eye of fantasy was hard to deal with, but Gavid Lindman's demon eye of divine glory was. To be completely honest, we would have been wiped out way earlier if Sir Vermouth had not been here, said Anise. She looked frustrated as she pursed her lips. It was known that Gavid Lindman's demon eye of divine glory had been directly bestowed to him by the Demon King of Incarceration. Who did Gavid Lindman treat as his god? It was the Demon King of Incarceration. As the name suggested, the demon eye of divine glory allowed Gavid Lindman to borrow the power of his god. In other words, he could use the power of the Demon King of Incarceration. Sienna silently clenched her trembling hand and turned her head. She looked around the battlefield with stiff eyes. The number of corpses outnumbered the survivors by far. Hamel. Then Sienna saw Vermouth supporting Hamel, who was rubbing off the blood around his mouth. Sensing Sienna's gaze on him, Hamel raised his head to look at her. Hamel waved his hand while speaking in a husky voice. That bastard was pretty good at running. They gave up on recovering the corpses of allies, but they did not abandon the funeral. Anise and the few surviving clergies knelt on the blood-stained plains and prayed to their god to deliver the souls of the dead warriors to heaven. I decided to leave our back to them, said Vermouth while staring at the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. The forces of the Black Fog and the demonic beast have been wiped out. The 5 of us will break through the remaining troops in the castle. The shield, staff, and blade should be remaining in the cast, but we 5 should be able to break through. Yes, 5, Hamel muttered while sitting on the body of a demonic beast. He looked rather calm despite having used ignition. It was almost as if he were experiencing no aftereffects from using ignition. It will be better for us to go alone than for everyone to go. We can fight in any situation if it's the 5 of us, and we'll be able to take care of each other as well. Shouldn't we also keep in mind that demons and demonic beasts might join forces from outside the Centipede Mountains? That's why we're leaving our backs to them, answered Molin. Although they had won the battle, the remaining troops looked as miserable as defeated soldiers. However, their eyes still glowed with a brilliant light. He added, "They are warriors. They will protect us even if it costs them their lives." "We'll leave tomorrow," said Hamel. Anise flinched and stared at Hamel with astonishment. "Don't be a fool. You of all people need to rest, Anne." "I'm not experiencing any rebound," Hamel cut in, raising himself up for everyone to see. "On the contrary, my body feels very light. Besides, if we stay here for a few days because of me, there would have been no point in targeting the plains." "But it's fine," asserted Hamel with a smile. Vermouth stared at Hamel for a while and then nodded. "You are right. We've already come this far, so we cannot wait any longer. However, Hamel, promise me this. Just as we will not leave you behind, you cannot leave us behind," Vermouth stated. "Why are you making it sound so complicated?" "You're just telling me not to die," responded Hamel. "We must go together from beginning to end. If you feel like you're going to collapse in the middle, don't force yourself and lean on us," said Vermouth. Right. Hamel waved his hand before springing down from the corpse of the demonic beast. Sienna observed Hamel's movements closely. Before, he had been unable to even move properly due to the rebound of ignition. It appeared that he wasn't lying about not experiencing any rebound. The flow of mana is stable as well. "He's fine." Sienna nodded while giving a sigh of relief. Tomorrow they would climb the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. Chapter 274. Side Story Interlude 4. Bonus image. Among the Demon Kings they had killed until now, the Demon King of Fury, who had been ranked 3rd, had 4 trusted subordinates under his command. They were the Children of Fury, also known as the 4 Heavenly Kings, and had been extremely powerful demons. The 4 had received great favor from the Demon King of Fury and had been given tremendous power after becoming his children. Kamash the Earthquaker, the Bloodshedder Sane, the Depraved Oberon, and the Abyssal Princess Iris. All 4 of them had been incomparably stronger than the other demon folks, but they had been killable. The 5 heroes who were challenging the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration had already killed Kamash and Sane and defeated Iris and Oberon many years ago. However, there was a marked difference between the 4 Heavenly Kings and the 3 subordinates of Incarceration. Little was known about the true strength of Incarceration's shield and staff, apart from the rumors that had circulated when they first emerged on the battlefield at the outset of the war. The 5 heroes had never personally confronted either of them in battle. Nevertheless, they had already confronted Gavid Lindman, the Blade of Incarceration, 2 times before. Through these encounters, they had gained knowledge of the immense strength that Incarceration's subordinates possessed and that it far exceeded that of the Children of Fury. With this understanding in mind, the 5 heroes had made thorough preparations to face Incarceration's subordinates once again. Q. Hamel's head jerked up as he spat out a mouthful of blood. He couldn't recall what had happened after he had gotten hit with a shield. It appeared he had been knocked out for a brief moment. "Hamel, are you okay?" A shrieking cry came from somewhere in front of him and caught his attention. Hamel saw Anise's back as her brilliant wings emitted light. The blow Hamel had received had contained a massive force, easily sufficient to cause him to burst into bits and pieces. If it had not been for Anise's divine magic, he knew he would have died on the spot. "It shouldn't have landed," Hamel thought, swallowing a mouthful of blood as he raised himself. Yorogos, the shield of incarceration, was a huge demon. Although not as tall as a giant, he was twice the size of Molin and covered in impenetrable armor. In his left hand he wielded a shield that resembled a castle gate in terms of size, and held in his right hand was a monstrous spear that seemed capable of piercing the thickest dragon hide. There were many spots for Hamel to target, though, since Yorogos was so large. Even if his thick and impenetrable armor and shield were disregarded, Yorogos himself was tough. But that just meant that Hamel had to attack him until he broke through. So what if the demon counterattacked? Yorogos was definitely not slow, and in fact he was incredibly fast despite his large size and the weight of his armor. However, he wasn't fast enough to avoid Hamel's detection, and it was easy for Hamel to predict Yorogos' movements due to his large stature. Even so, Hamel had failed to avoid Yorogos' attack. Hamel had been prepared but had momentarily lost control of his body. So he ended up taking the blow, resulting in his current state. Hamel chuckled while rubbing the blood off from around his mouth. "I'm still fine." The blow would have crushed all the bones in his body, but Anissa's divine power had glued his body back together. It wasn't completely healed though. He could still feel his bones creaking and his organs aching. Regardless, it couldn't be helped since they were in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. The dark power that weighed down on them was burdensome, and the staff of incarceration, the withered lich, was unfolding black magic from the castle gate, dampening the effects of divine magic. Despite that, it wasn't to the point of rendering Hamel immobile. So he stumbled forward while looking ahead. The first thing he saw was Anissa's wings. Although her back was obscured by her robe, he could imagine that her back and the stigmata were completely soaked and drenched in blood. Hamel then met Sienna's gaze. She stood to his side a little distance away. Sienna could only steal worried glances at Hamel as she couldn't voice her concerns. It couldn't be helped since she was currently devoting most of her attention to controlling her magic while verbalizing the incantations of her spells. "I'm fine," said Hamel with a grin, shaking his hands for her to see. Then he strode forward. Beyond the swirling storm of divine power and magic, he could see Molin and Vermouth. Molin was directly facing off against Yorogos, who was twice his size. The moron had thrown away his weapons and he was pushing against Yorogos' shield with both of his hands. The roar of the challenger and the defender resonated throughout the hall, and Yorogos pushed forward with all his might. Each time, Molin's feet were forced to drag backward while his muscles swelled and his veins burst. Even so, Molin managed to stand his ground somewhat. So what if he was being pushed back slightly? Molin wasn't alone in his fight against Yorogos. While he held Yorogos in place, Vermouth dug into the openings in Yorogos' defense. He swung both the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword, causing a wave of light to crash over Yorogos. Rumbly, Yorogos was pushed back further than the ground he had covered. There were visible cracks on his solid armor, and black blood gushed from inside his helmet. "Hamel!" shouted Vermouth. It was an uncharacteristically passionate cry. Vermouth always shouted for Hamel on the battlefield. Hamel was the only one who could keep pace with him in close combat, and the two always worked in harmony. Once Vermouth landed a blow, Hamel would immediately follow up with an attack of his own, leading the way for Vermouth to take over again. The two had always fought the same way in the battles against the demon folks and the demon kings. Hamel's lips curved up into a smile when he felt the worry contained in Vermouth's cry. While placing a hand on his left chest, Hamel whispered under his breath, "I told you that I'm fine." "Hey!" Sienna shouted once again while looking at him anxiously. "It's fine," whispered Hamel once more as he grabbed at his heart and his core. Hamel was once again struck with a realization, and the same truth was yet again made clear to him. He could not use divine power like Anise, and he could not use magic like Sienna. All he could do was to charge forward and fight at the front. Hamel was strong, but he wasn't stronger than Vermouth. He could not wield the Moonlight Sword, let alone the Holy Sword. Moreover, he wasn't proficient in everything like Vermouth. Hamel was tough, but he wasn't tougher than Molin. Unlike Hamel, who had been almost killed by a single blow from Yorogos, Molin was still tanking Yorogos' attacks from the front. "If someone has to die, I will," Hamel resolved. Even if Hamel died, Molin would persist and fight. Even if Hamel could no longer fight, Vermouth would fight in his place. Ignition. The dying embers began to burn once more. There was a brief moment before sunset when the world was filled with light. Fires always burned the brightest before they were completely snuffed out. Hamel used what little remained of his life and his body as fuel to rekindle his fire. He cared little about what he gave to it. The flames swelled exponentially as it devoured Hamel's offerings, and his shriveled core emitted an incredibly dense burst of mana. Hamel bent his knees while taking a large gulp of air. Boom! His first step was accompanied by an explosion of mana. Hamel used the torrent of mana to accelerate his body and took his place beside Vermouth in an instant. Vermouth flinched when he saw the huge aura of mana surrounding Hamel as well as the latter's glistening eyes. However, Vermouth held his tongue and the battle resumed. It was completely one-sided. Hamel and Vermouth attacked together to break Urogo's spear and armor. Molen robbed Urogos of his shield and swung it like a blunt weapon, driving Urogos against the wall. Urogos was also bombarded by a barrage of magic and divine power, which completely broke his armor and ripped him to shreds. Then Vermouth took off Urogos' head with the moonlight sword. "Let's go," Hamel said. Hamel was the first to jump step over Urogos' body. He calmed his rampaging core and rubbed off the dried blood from his chin. "Are you out of your mind?" shouted Sienna as she rushed forward without a care for her own injuries. She reached out and grabbed Hamel's shoulder. "Go where?" "Your body is moving just fine," responded Hamel with a faint smile. It was the same as before during the battle on the Red Plains. Even though he had used ignition, he felt no rebound. Hamel was well aware of why he wasn't experiencing any aftereffects. A small spark remained in his core, which was on the brink of collapsing completely. Once the fire was snuffed out, it would be impossible for him to fight anymore. No, in fact, his life would be extinguished along with the spark. Nevertheless, as long as the spark remained, he could still move and he could still fight. He had faced numerous obstacles and difficulties throughout his life, and his body was putting up one final fight, a last act of defiance. Hamel was determined not to back down and let his spirit fade away. He knew that if he could still move and fight, he would push forward with all his might and refuse to let his flame go out. At present, they were only on the lower level of the castle, and they still had to face the other subordinates of incarceration as well as the Demon King of Incarceration himself. Hamel was determined to keep his spark burning brightly, no matter what challenges lay ahead. "We're going up," Vermouth said. Although he couldn't help but second-guess Hamel's judgment, Vermouth pushed those thoughts away. He did not want to think about it anymore. Vermouth had seen the light in Hamel's eyes, and he had been unable to ignore it. He wanted to believe in the light. "Since we've already infiltrated the castle, we can't afford to relax. We might have bought some time, but I'm not completely sure we'll be able to dispel the curse and the dark power of the entire castle," said Anise. She desperately attempted to shake off her anxiety, but she couldn't help but bite her lip worriedly when she looked back at the tightly shut gates. The Demon King of Incarceration had no intention of allowing any intruders to retreat. As soon as they entered the castle, the gates had shut tight. In order to open the gates again, they would either have to kill the Demon King of Incarceration or negotiate with him. However, who among the 5 of them would ever try to negotiate with the Demon King? "The Demon King won't let us rest," commented Molen while tightening the grip of his trembling hands. He strode up to Hamel and lifted his friend. Hamel became dumbfounded and attempted to escape Molen's grasp, but Molen ignored him and placed Hamel on his shoulder. He said, "Let's go like this, Hamel. Try to rest as much as possible on my shoulder." "Well," Hamel scoffed, but he did not jump off Molen's shoulder. Sienna couldn't say anything as she anxiously tugged at her robe. "I guess there's no helping it." She forced a smile onto her face while shaking off her uneasy thoughts. "Hamel, you stay back a little so that you don't get caught up in the magic of Archwizard Sienna." It was a joke she often made. Sienna raised a kasha and tapped Hamel's leg, which dropped to the side of Molen's shoulder. "It'll be fine," Sienna thought to herself for the 100th time. Hamel looked fine even after using ignition, and everyone was still in decent condition. It wasn't as if they were strangers to the struggles that greeted them whenever they entered the castle of a Demon King. The castle of the Demon King of Incarceration would be no different. The castles of the other Demon Kings had been impossible to escape as well. They had climbed up to the top floor and battled the castle's master without taking any breaks. The 5 of them had always fought such unfavorable and seemingly hopeless battles. It will be the same. Sienna imagined the scene that would come after the battle. After they had killed the demon king of incarceration and conquered the castle. Simply thinking such thoughts helped ease the anxiety in her heart slightly. Rather than being weighed down by the all-encompassing despair and letting it drive her insane, she filled her mind with hope. The unreachable was close. Hope. Sienna pressed down on her hat while chewing on her lips. Belial was the staff of incarceration, the lich and the master of Vladimir. The party of heroes overcame numerous terrible traps that Belial had set as well as repeated ambushes. After climbing to the middle floors of the castle, they finally encountered him. The entire floor was Belial's dungeon, and he summoned numerous familiars to greet the intruders. Belial wielded the power of the demon king that he served, and his magic was dark and menacing. Despite this, Sienna and Vermouth's magic was not inferior. Moreover, Sienna had a deep-seated hatred for necromancers and their ability to raise an unending army of undead. The form of the battle wasn't important. Sienna tried her best. Everyone tried their best. It was as if time had stopped. Everyone saw the same thing. Belial's life vessel had been smashed. Although liches were close to being immortal, their lives were tied together with their life vessels. Once it was destroyed, they would be vanquished as well. While being swept away by the moonlight sword, Belial used his last resort, an attack containing the last bit of his power before death. This was quite an obvious attempt at an attack. It was aimed at Vermouth, but he was more than capable of dodging it. No one doubted him. It should have been the same for Hamel. Hamel was the last one to ever doubt Vermouth. Hamel knew how Vermouth fought and he knew how strong Vermouth was. Such an attack could never hope to kill Vermouth. "Why?" uttered Sienna with utter shock. It had been an unexpected and sudden act, which made it even more unbelievable. For a reason unknown to them, Hamel had jumped in front of Vermouth. Even before Vermouth could avoid the curse, Hamel had used himself as a shield against it. Why? Sienna couldn't understand the reason why. Hamel wasn't supposed to be there. There was not much for Hamel and Molin, the warriors, to do in a battle of magic against Belial. Their role in a battle like this was to protect Sienna and Anise. They had carried out their roles with perfection this time as well. Despite his struggles, Hamel had fulfilled his duty anyway, and that was where it was supposed to have ended. Hamel. Sienna staggered up to Hamel. Vermouth stood dazedly looking down at Hamel. "Please," uttered Sienna. Molin screamed, "Hamel." He lifted Hamel's body. It was light. Molin's eyes quivered and he looked around, not knowing what to do. He walked over to a wall nearby and sat Hamel down. Molin said, "Anise. Come over here quickly." Hamel is. Anise's legs gave out beneath her as she covered her mouth with both her hands. Her role as a priestess was to ensure the safety of her comrades, but she couldn't fulfill her role right now. A curse. This was no ordinary curse. It was a curse conjured by Belial, the worst black wizard and lich in history, in exchange for his life. Even brushing against it would have caused a fatal curse to permeate one's body. "Ha," Hamel chuckled, tilting his head back, but black blood poured out as soon as he opened his mouth. Tears fell from Anise's eyes at the sight. Anise knew what would follow. The curse, which utilized the dark power of the demon king of incarceration, would slowly destroy Hamel's body from the inside out. Even though Anise was the saintess and the imitation incarnation of light, it was impossible for her to purify all of the dark power of a demon king. In the end, Eugene's body would completely break down and he would perish. Unfortunately, that would not be his end. A soul inflicted with the curse of the demon king could not go to heaven or hell. At the moment of death, it would become the possession of the demon king. This truth devastated Anise. Hamel would not be able to go to heaven. Hamel. Sienna howled. She attempted to approach Hamel but stumbled over her steps and her legs gave out beneath her. Sienna tried to get back on her feet, but she could give no strength to her legs. In the end, she was forced to crawl toward Hamel. "What are you crying about?" said Hamel with a grin. Why was he smiling? Sienna just couldn't understand why Hamel was smiling. She shook her head as tears dripped down her cheeks. She gazed at the hazy figure of Hamel through her blurred vision. Sienna could see a hole in the center of his body, but she couldn't see Hamel's insides through the hole. The hole was filled with the curse and only darkness was visible inside it. As the curse spread, it ate away at Hamel's body. "Anise." "W, what are you doing? Come quickly. The wound is getting bigger," Sienna stuttered. There wasn't even any blood coming from the hole. Sienna tucked her trembling hand inside her robe. Right, she still had the elixir. It was a precious remedy crafted with holy water and infused with divine power and magic. The concoction served as an all-purpose medicine for emergencies when magic or divine magic couldn't be employed. They had several doses left in reserve since Anissa's presence meant they didn't really need it. "It's fine," Sienna muttered to herself once more. Everything was fine. It had to be. Sienna repeatedly muttered such words while pulling out a bottle. She popped the cap of the elixir and poured the concoction over Hamel's wound. Unfortunately, even though she finished pouring an entire bottle, the wound showed no signs of healing. "It's fine." There were more bottles and Anise was here as well. Anise seemed to have collapsed from the shock, but she would quickly regain her senses and come running over. She would reprimand Hamel for being an idiot before healing him and making him whole again. "It's fine," Sienna murmured yet again. She emptied several bottles. Hamel only coughed up blood in the meantime, and the light in his eyes dimmed every time he blinked. "Get lost," said Hamel. His voice was weak. It was as if his life was slipping away. "Please," Sienna begged while crying. She had a headache, there was a terrible taste in her mouth and her heart was pounding. She was cold, hot and trembling. That's why I told you to go back. Why did you have to be so stubborn and," Sienna said without meaning to. Feeling disgusted at herself, she quickly clasped her hand over her mouth. "Sienna, put that away first." Hamel gave a weak smile while staring at Sienna. He could see her figure as his vision dimmed. "The elixirs are precious. Why are you trying to use such precious things here?" "Don't waste them," said Hamel. "But..." Sienna shook her head with tears streaming down her face. How could the elixirs be considered precious when they were unable to heal Hamel's wounds in the most dire of times? At this moment, Anise joined Sienna. She sat down and held her rosary as she recited a prayer. Tears flowed down Anise's cheeks as she summoned a glowing light at the tip of her fingers and directed it toward Hamel's wound. However, the light failed to illuminate the darkness. "That's enough. I know my body best. I can't survive. I'm about to die," Hamel stated calmly while vomiting blood. Sienna did not want to hear such words. She didn't want to accept them either. She lowered her head, taking ragged breaths. "I could have avoided it," muttered Vermouth, stumbling toward Hamel. "There was no need for you to do this." Belial's curse had been directed at Vermouth, but Hamel had intercepted it at will. Sienna could not bring herself to look at Vermouth's face. "Get out of here," Hamel said with a laugh. "You should have known." Vermouth grabbed his pale face. "There's no need for you to die like this." Sienna sobbed silently. She did not want to accept it and she did not want to believe it. However, in the end she had no choice but to face reality. The warmth of Hamel's hand was fading away, and the light in his eyes was dimming. "This is enough to be an honorable death," Hamel said. "Why did that matter?" Sienna raised Hamel's hand and placed it on her cheek. The tears that streamed down her face were so hot. She wanted to add warmth to his hand. "It was obvious that I would only be a burden if we continued, and I didn't want to go back either," explained Hamel. In the end, Hamel proved himself to be a stubborn fool. Sienna had known that his physical condition had been abnormal. In fact, she knew that she had been fooling herself by her own consolations that Hamel was fine. She had seen Hamel's body become slow as they battled their way up the castle, and he had not stood at the center of the battles. If he accompanied them further, he would only get in their way. Yet now that he was here, he could no longer return. "You're supposed to be so fucking cool, so I shouldn't need to console you." Hamel's voice was slowly dying. Sienna repeatedly muttered to herself that it was fine as she clasped his hands. "I'm getting sleepy, so go," Hamel murmured. He said nothing more after that, and the light disappeared from his eyes. Vermouth lowered his head and knelt down, muttering in a small voice, "Thank you." This was the end. Hamel spoke no more and he did not open his eyes again. The hand that Sienna held went limp in her grasp. Sienna hated how Hamel had acted. It pained her and she resented him for leaving nothing behind. She had hoped for something more, even if it turned out to be a lifelong curse for everyone who survived. She had been hoping for something cliché, something like "make sure you kill the demon kings, save the world, or be happy." But Hamel, that bastard, had left no such wishes. Was it because he had trusted his comrades? Perhaps. Even so. I need it, Sienna muttered. Sienna had never imagined a future without Hamel, and even though it was happening in front of her eyes, she could not believe it. Hamel had always been there in the future that Sienna painted. I need it, Sienna repeated. Even if his will turned into a curse, she needed a reason to continue. If Hamel had asked her to kill the demon kings and save the world, Sienna would have lived her life to fulfill his wishes. If Hamel had asked them to be happy, then, please, Sienna begged. The curse would have caused her to be unhappy for the rest of her life, but she would have forced herself to be happy for the sake of Hamel. God of light, almighty, please. Please protect and watch over this stupid lamb. The rough journey he will experience, after rest. With love and mercy, Anise failed to see her prayer through to the end. She fell sobbing and Molen broke out screaming. He rampaged like a madman, smashing the walls and the floor with his fists. Boom, boom. While Anise and Sienna wept and Molen roared and screamed, Vermouth remained kneeling on the ground with his head bowed. And no. Sienna raised her hand after sobbing for some time. The hand she held was becoming too light. The curse that penetrated Hamel's body was eating away at his body, causing him to disappear. Sienna shook her head while desperately grabbing hold of his body. No, no, no. Don't go. Don't leave me behind. Sienna howled while putting her cheek against Hamel's face. Anise stared at the two of them with bloodshot eyes. Please, tell me, Sienna moaned tearfully. She could no longer feel Hamel's body in her embrace. His body was gone, vaporized by the Demon King's curse. Anise, please. Hamel. Did Hamel go to heaven? Heaven. He had to have gone there, right? Said Sienna while looking back at Anise. More than anyone else in the world, the five of them deserved to be happy. It was a given. And if they could not be happy in this life, then at least they deserved to be happy after they died. He could not, Anise said while sobbing. Sienna screamed and took Anise by her collar. Why not? Why, you always said that there is a God, that heaven is real. You said that everyone would go to heaven after we died. You said that, howled Sienna. Hamel's soul. Naturally, he should have gone to heaven. But right now his soul is in the hands of the Demon King of Incarceration. As long as the Demon King chooses not to let him go, Hamel. Sienna screamed as she didn't want to hear anymore. She fell down to the ground and screamed even more while banging her forehead against the floor. Hamel wouldn't be able to see the end of the war and live a happy life, and he wouldn't even be able to go to heaven? After spending 16 years wandering the battlefield and doing nothing but fighting, he would have to spend an eternity in the hands of the Demon King? Not yet, Vermouth broke the silence. He raised his head and Sienna finally got a glimpse of his face. Vermouth's face, which had always been calm and emotionless, was crumpled, and there were tear marks under his empty eyes. It's not the end yet, he stated. The end? We are still here, Vermouth said, staggering to his feet. Molen stopped short at his words, and Anise looked up at Vermouth with blank eyes. That's right, muttered Sienna. She saw her hands were bloody, but she couldn't tell whether the blood was hers or Hamel's. Sienna slowly spread her hands and saw the necklace Hamel had left behind. We just have to kill the Demon King of Incarceration, said Vermouth. The quivering in Sienna's eyes subsided. We just have to rescue Hamel's soul after killing the Demon King of Incarceration, continued Vermouth. Vermouth was right. It wasn't over yet. They were still here. She was still here. Sienna took a kasha from the ground and tightened her grasp. One day, Sienna murmured as she placed Hamel's necklace against her cheek. It almost felt as if Hamel's warmth remained on the ornament. Her tears continued to flow without stopping, and the terrible taste in her mouth still lingered. Sienna chewed the inside of her mouth and tasted blood. I'm alive. She put on the necklace while coming to face the terrible reality. Someday, may we meet in the world you wished for, she said. Sienna took her own words as a lifelong curse. She glared at the ceiling with eyes completely devoid of any light. Vermouth was the first to start walking, stumbling forward as if he could fall any moment. Molen followed behind him with drooping shoulders. Meanwhile, Anise opened the bottle in her hands. She tried to pour holy water, or rather alcohol, into her mouth, but there wasn't even a single drop remaining. Sienna dragged her feet while holding Akasha, looking back several times along the way. She gazed at the wall where Hamel died. There was no body remaining, but she still saw Hamel leaning against the wall. "Just wait, Hamel." She tightly clasped her hand around the necklace. "I'll come to save your soul."